Your knuckles are white on the control yoke. Below you, a swarm of Japanese Zeros dances with impunity. They know your secret. They know your magnificent P-38 Lightning, a marvel of engineering, becomes an uncontrollable death trap in a steep dive. The manual, the generals, every voice of authority screams one command: do not follow them down. But the enemy is escaping, mocking your power with a simple, arrogant maneuver. In this moment, high above the Pacific, you face a choice. Obey the rule that's meant to keep you alive, or break it to win the war. This was the paradox of the P-38 Lightning in the spring of 1943. On paper, it was a war-winning weapon, a machine born from the brilliant mind of Lockheed's chief engineer, Clarence Kelly Johnson. Its twin-boom design was unlike anything else in the sky, a futuristic silhouette powered by two fearsome Allison V1710 engines. It was a heavyweight brawler designed to climb higher, fly faster, and hit harder than any opponent it might face. For the pilots of the 5th Air Force under Major General George C. Kenney, it was their thoroughbred, their champion. The German Luftwaffe had even given it a grudging nickname, the Fork-tailed Devil. But this devil had a demon of its own, a gremlin born not of enemy action, but of physics itself. The problem had a name: compressibility. It was a terrifying phenomenon that occurred as the large, thick wings of the P-38 approached the sound barrier in a dive. Air, which normally flows like a fluid, would begin to stack up, to compress into shock waves over the control surfaces. The first sign was a violent buffeting, a shudder running through the airframe as if the plane were being torn apart by an invisible giant. Then the controls would lock, turning to concrete in the pilot's hands. The nose would pitch down uncontrollably, steepening the dive and accelerating the aircraft further into the coffin corner of the flight envelope. Pulling back on the yoke did nothing. The pilot was no longer flying. He was a passenger on a 300-mile-per-hour missile aimed at the Earth. This wasn't just a theoretical danger discussed in sterile engineering briefings. The fear was cemented in tragedy. Back in November of 1941, a test pilot had pushed the Lightning too far, discovering its limits in the most final way possible. His death sent a shockwave through the program, leading to a stark, unambiguous prohibition. Official doctrine, etched in manuals and hammered home in pilot briefings, was absolute. Do not engage in high-speed, steep-angle dives. The rule was born of a desire to save lives and preserve precious aircraft. Yet, in the skies over the Solomon Islands, this well-intentioned caution had become a tactical liability. The Japanese pilots, flying their nimble Mitsubishi A6M Zeros, were not engineers, but they were masterful combatants. They learned quickly. They saw the pattern. When a powerful P-38 closed in, its cannons and machine guns ready to spit fire, the Zero pilot had a foolproof escape hatch. He would simply push his control stick forward, plunging into a near-vertical dive. The American pilot, bound by his orders, could only watch in frustration as his target disappeared. The Zero pilot didn't need to outfly the Lightning. He just needed to force it into a situation where its own design would defeat it. This single vulnerability was undermining the P-38's entire strategic purpose in the Pacific, turning a superior interceptor into a frustrated observer. The rule designed to protect pilots was now preventing them from fighting effectively, creating a battlefield where the enemy dictated the terms of engagement. For every pilot climbing into the cockpit at Guadalcanal, the question lingered in the back of their mind. What do you do when the only way to win is to break the one rule meant to keep you from dying? The answer would be found not in an engineering lab, but in the crucible of combat on a fateful day in April. The day was April 18th, 1943. The air over the Solomon Islands was thick with humidity and tension, a sprawling battlefield of turquoise water and jungle green islands. On this very day, history was being made elsewhere in the sky. A hand-picked squadron of P-38's flying a clandestine mission, codenamed Operation Vengeance, was at that moment hunting for a single, high-value target: the architect of Pearl Harbor, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The fate of that mission would echo through the halls of power in both Tokyo and Washington. But on another patrol, in another sector of that same vast sky, a different kind of history was about to be written. It wouldn't be planned in a top-secret briefing room, but forged in the split-second instincts of a single pilot. That pilot was First Lieutenant Rex T. Barber. Barber was not a daredevil or a maverick in the classic sense. He was a professional, a skilled aviator who understood his machine and its limits. He had felt the ominous shudder of compressibility on training flights. He had listened to the grim warnings from his commanding officers. He knew the rules, but he also knew the frustration of watching a perfectly good target simply dive away to safety, leaving him circling impotently in the sky above. On that April morning, as Barber and his squadron climbed out from their base on Guadalcanal, the mission was routine: a fighter sweep over Bougainville, intended to challenge Japanese air superiority and protect Allied assets on the ground. The initial ascent was deceptively calm. The twin Allisons hummed in perfect unison. The Pacific stretched out below like a wrinkled blue map, and the cockpits were hot under the relentless sun. The sky seemed empty, vast, and indifferent. Then, the illusion shattered. Radio calls crackled with alarm as spotters reported bogies, many of them. The sky was no longer empty. It was a hornet's nest. From out of the sun and clouds they came, dozens of them. Approximately 40 Mitsubishi Zeros descended upon the small American formation in a coordinated, overwhelming ambush. The Americans were caught completely by surprise, outnumbered and outmaneuvered in the initial chaotic seconds. The air became a whirlwind of streaking aircraft, a three-dimensional knife fight with no front line and no place to hide. The P-38's, with their superior speed and firepower, were formidable opponents in a straight fight. Barber and his comrades fought with disciplined fury, their heavy machine guns and cannon tearing through the fragile frames of several Zeros. But the Japanese pilots were experienced, and they knew the American playbook better than the Americans themselves. After a firing pass, or a defensive maneuver, when a Zero found itself in a disadvantageous position, the pilot would invariably do the same thing. He would roll his aircraft over and plunge toward the jungle canopy thousands of feet below. It was a maddeningly effective tactic. One after another, damaged or threatened Zeros simply exited the fight, vanishing into dives the P-38's could not safely follow. The Americans could win the initial engagement, but they couldn't finish the fight. It was a battle of attrition where the enemy held a get-out-of-jail-free card. As the furious engagement stretched on, Rex Barber lined up a Zero in his sights. He walked his tracers across its fuselage, seeing puffs of smoke and debris tear away from the enemy plane. It was a killing blow, or it should have been. But the Japanese pilot, reacting instantly, did what he had been trained to do. He nosed over hard and fell away. Barber watched him go, another one escaping, another victory denied by a flaw in his own magnificent machine. But this time, something was different. The frustration, the countless hours of training, the sheer injustice of the tactic, it all coalesced into a single, defiant thought. The rule was there to save his life, but what was the point of saving his life if it meant losing the battle? In that heart-stopping moment, with the damaged Zero plummeting towards the sea, First Lieutenant Rex T. Barber made a decision that defied every regulation, every warning, and every instinct for self-preservation that had been drilled into him. He pushed his own control yoke forward. The nose of his P-38 Lightning dipped, and the world outside his canopy tilted from a horizontal plane of sky and sea into a vertical blur of green and blue. He was doing the one thing he was explicitly forbidden to do. He was diving after the Zero. The acceleration was instantaneous and brutal, pressing him deep into his seat. The whine of the Allison engines shifted into a terrifying, high-pitched scream as the propellers bit into the air at a ferocious rate. His airspeed indicator needle began to sweep clockwise, climbing past the red line, past the known points of safety, and into the dark, uncharted territory of the flight envelope. 250 miles per hour. 300. 350. The numbers became an abstraction. The real measure of his speed was the growing protest of the airframe itself. It began as a low-frequency vibration, a tremor in the control stick that he could feel in the bones of his arm. Then came the shudder. The dreaded compressibility buffeting started to take hold, shaking the entire aircraft with a violent, rhythmic palsy. It felt as if the wings themselves were trying to tear loose from the fuselage. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return where other pilots had lost control and plunged to their deaths. Every fiber of his training screamed at him to pull up, to ease off, to save himself. But below him, growing larger in his gun sight, was the Zero. Barber was no longer just a pilot. He was a scientist conducting the most dangerous experiment of his life at 400 miles per hour. He knew from hangar talk and whispered theories that the key to survival might not be in fighting the dive, but in managing it. He recalled discussions about the trim tabs, small, adjustable surfaces on the elevators. In theory, they could provide just enough aerodynamic leverage to counteract the intense nose-down pitching moment caused by the shock waves forming on the wings. It was an unproven, desperate gamble. With one hand locked on the vibrating yoke, he reached for the trim wheel. He fed in nose-up trim, a delicate and counterintuitive act in the midst of such violence. The effect wasn't immediate, but slowly, agonizingly, he began to feel a subtle shift in pressure. The plane was still diving, still shaking violently, but it was no longer an entirely wild beast. He had a fragile, tenuous grip on the reins. He was flying inside the storm, not just being consumed by it. Down, down he plunged, a silver predator chasing its prey into the abyss. The Zero pilot, who had initiated the dive with the absolute certainty of escape, must have felt a cold spike of disbelief and terror. The fork-tailed devil was not supposed to be here. It was breaking the rules of the sky. Barber held the dive, keeping the enemy aircraft centered in his sights as the jungle canopy rushed up to meet them both. The air was growing thick and heavy at the lower altitude. He squeezed the trigger. The nose of the P-38 erupted in a torrent of fire. A concentrated stream of cannon shells and 50 caliber bullets, traveling at thousands of feet per second, crossed the shrinking distance to the Zero in an instant. The Japanese fighter disintegrated. It didn't just trail smoke. It vanished in a ball of orange flame and black debris, a brief, violent punctuation mark in the sky. The immediate threat was gone. Now Barber faced his own. He had to pull out. He applied full nose-up trim and heaved back on the yoke with all his strength, his muscles straining against the immense G-forces that threatened to send him into blackness. The P-38 groaned in protest, its metal skin creaking under the colossal strain. For a few terrifying seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the nose began to rise. The green of the jungle was replaced by the blue of the horizon, and then the pure, empty blue of the sky. He had done it. He had flown through the forbidden zone and emerged, alive, on the other side. As Rex Barber leveled his wings, the adrenaline of the dive gave way to a stunning realization. He had not only survived, he had triumphed. The entire engagement, from the moment he committed to the dive to the destruction of the Zero, had lasted mere minutes, perhaps less. But in that brief window of time, the tactical landscape of the Pacific Air War had been fundamentally altered. He hadn't just shot down an enemy plane, he had shot down the enemy's most reliable and psychologically potent defense. The Zero's invincible escape route was no longer invincible. When Barber and his squadron mates returned to the heat and dust of their Guadalcanal airstrip, the story of his forbidden dive spread not through official reports, but through the informal, high-speed network of pilots and ground crews. It became the stuff of hangar legend almost overnight. There was no fanfare, no medal ceremony for breaking a direct order. The initial reaction from command was likely a mixture of muted relief and stern disapproval. But you cannot put a discovery of this magnitude back in the bottle. The knowledge passed from pilot to pilot, in hushed conversations over lukewarm coffee and during pre-flight checks on the flight line. It was a grassroots revolution in tactics, a solution discovered not by engineers in a wind tunnel thousands of miles away, but by a combatant at the sharp end of the spear. Pilots began to practice the technique, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. They learned the feel of the initial buffet, the precise amount of trim needed to maintain a sliver of control, and the immense physical strength required to pull out of the dive at low altitude. They were rewriting the P-38's flight manual in the unforgiving classroom of the sky. The effect on the Japanese was immediate and devastating. Zero pilots who had previously dived away with impunity now found themselves being followed. Their sanctuary had been violated. The shock and confusion in those cockpits must have been profound as the dreaded fork-tailed devil stayed on their tail, its guns blazing, all the way down to the treetops. The psychological advantage, once firmly in the hands of the Japanese, had swung violently in favor of the Americans. Kill ratios began to improve dramatically. P-38 squadrons that had once struggled to confirm victories were now scoring with greater regularity and decisiveness. General Kenny's 5th Air Force was finally able to unleash the full intended lethality of its premier fighter. This informal adoption of a dangerous tactic highlights a classic tension within any military organization: the conflict between rigid, top-down doctrine and the fluid, adaptive reality of the battlefield. Doctrine is written in the ink of safety and past experience, designed to prevent catastrophic failure. But initiative is written in the fire of immediate necessity, designed to achieve victory. Rex Barber's dive was a calculated risk, an act of professional defiance born from the certainty that the official solution was failing. He wagered his life on the belief that the machine was more capable than its designers believed, and that the pilot in the cockpit was the ultimate arbiter of what was possible. His victory was a vindication of that belief, proving that sometimes the greatest risks are necessary to overcome the greatest obstacles. While this pilot-led tactical shift was changing the game in the skies over the Solomons, the engineers at Lockheed were, of course, working on a permanent mechanical fix. The problem of compressibility was well understood on a theoretical level. The challenge was developing a solution that could be retrofitted onto an existing aircraft design without compromising its performance. The answer they devised was elegant in its simplicity. A set of small, electrically actuated flaps on the underside of the wings, known as dive recovery flaps. When activated during a high-speed dive, these new flaps would extend into the turbulent airflow under the wing. Their purpose was not to act as a brake in the conventional sense, but to alter the aerodynamic properties of the wing itself. By creating a small amount of lift far back on the wing chord, they effectively changed the center of pressure, generating a powerful nose-up pitching moment that counteracted the effects of compressibility. In essence, they gave the pilot a mechanical lever to pry the aircraft out of a dive when muscle and trim tabs alone might not be enough. This was the official engineered solution, a safe, reliable, and manufacturer-approved method for taming the P-38's high-speed demons. But the wheels of industry and military logistics turned slowly, especially in the midst of a global war. The design had to be perfected, tested, manufactured, and then shipped across the vast expanse of the Pacific. The new system was slated for introduction on the next major production variant of the Lightning, the P-38J. These improved models, complete with the life-saving dive flaps, began to arrive in the Pacific theater in significant numbers around December of 1943. By the time the P-38J became the standard, Rex Barber and his fellow pilots had already been employing their own high-risk, high-reward solution for over 7 months. They had bridged a critical capabilities gap, not with new technology, but with raw courage and a refined, if unauthorized, technique. The arrival of the dive flaps didn't introduce a new tactic so much as it validated and made safe an existing one. It was a formal acknowledgement from the world of engineering that the pilots in the field had been right all along. The P-38 could fight in the vertical, it could dive with the Zeros, and it could win. The dive flaps simply made this reality accessible to every pilot, not just the exceptionally skilled or daring. The story of the P-38's compressibility problem is more than just a technical footnote in the history of aviation. It serves as a powerful illustration of the evolution of warfare itself. It shows how a technological stalemate, the P-38's power versus the Zero's maneuverability and dive escape, was broken first by human ingenuity and battlefield adaptation. The hardware eventually caught up, but the tactical breakthrough was achieved by the software, the mind of the pilot. Rex Barber's dive on April 18, 1943, was never officially lauded as a turning point. There were no press releases celebrating a pilot who broke the rules. His name is forever linked to the other, more famous mission of that day, the successful interception of Admiral Yamamoto's transport. And yet his decision to push his aircraft past its accepted limits had an equally profound, if more subtle, impact on the war. The Yamamoto mission eliminated a single, vital enemy leader. Barber's dive eliminated the Zero's most vital tactical advantage. One was a strategic decapitation. The other was the systematic dismantling of an enemy's entire air combat doctrine. The psychological ripple effect was immense. For American pilots, the sky was no longer a place with invisible walls and forbidden zones. They now owned the vertical dimension as much as the horizontal. For Japanese pilots, the once certain path to safety became a potential death trap. This shift didn't happen because a new piece of equipment arrived. It happened because one pilot chose to believe in his machine more than the men who wrote the manual for it. He proved that the ultimate factor in any conflict is not the specification sheet of the weapon, but the will and intelligence of the warrior who wields it. In the grand narrative of the Second World War, a conflict defined by titanic clashes of armies and navies, the story of a single pilot in a single dive can seem small. But history often pivots on such moments. The air war in the Pacific was a war of accumulated victories, an unforgiving process of establishing air superiority, island by island, archipelago by archipelago. Every engagement, every destroyed enemy aircraft contributed to the relentless Allied advance toward Japan. By nullifying the Zero's primary escape tactic, the P-38 pilots, following Barber's audacious lead, accelerated that process. They saved American lives, not just in the air, but on the ground and at sea, beneath the umbrella of air cover they could now more effectively provide. The tale of the forbidden dive is a testament to the fact that wars are not won by machines, but by the people who operate them. It underscores the critical importance of individual initiative on the battlefield. While generals and strategists plan grand campaigns from distant headquarters, it is the lieutenant, the sergeant, the pilot in the cockpit who must ultimately face the enemy and adapt to the chaotic, unpredictable reality of combat. Rigid adherence to doctrine can be a recipe for disaster when the enemy refuses to follow the script. Rex T. Barber and the pilots who followed his example understood this implicitly. They recognized that the official rules, created with the best of intentions, had become a tactical straitjacket. They took a calculated risk, trusting their skills and their aircraft to perform beyond the accepted limits, and in doing so, they handed a decisive advantage back to the Allied forces. Looking back, the legacy of that day is twofold. First, it is a story of engineering and innovation, of how a critical flaw in a brilliant aircraft was identified and ultimately corrected, making the P-38J Lightning one of the most formidable and versatile fighters of the entire war. But more importantly, it is a human story. It's about the courage to question authority when lives are on the line, the intelligence to find a novel solution under extreme pressure, and the professional skill to execute a maneuver that sat on the razor's edge between triumph and catastrophe. High above the jungle canopy of Bougainville in a terrifying, shuddering dive, a pilot didn't just chase an enemy fighter. He chased away the ghost in his machine, and in doing so helped clear the skies for victory.